In our operation, cell builders are robust colonies that we make queenless so they can receive grafted larvae. Inside, you'll need capped and emerging brood, 2 frames of pollen, and plenty of nectar. I'm going to talk in great detail about this in a moment, but I really just want to give you an overview of like who the heck I am and what I do and why I do it that way first, and then we will go into a deep dive of what's in the cell raiser. So when James and I started talking a few months ago about this presentation, I was really feeling myself about cell raisers or cell builders, which are where we raise high quality queens in mass. And so I decided to do a presentation called The Science of Cell Builders. The more I thought about this, the more I felt like what I actually have to say is more about the art of cell builders. But we'll see where everybody lands at the end of this presentation. So as James said, my name is Ange. I run They Keep Bees. We raise high quality queens, conduct climate adaptation research, and facilitate skill shares. I do that with my partner here, Bee, who is currently making some splits from our overwintered stock that we're gonna graft from here in Florida. So they're not here with us today. We are a migratory operation, so we move between Western Massachusetts and Florida, and we're about to set up shop in Western North Carolina. And we have been in operation for 6 years, and we've been raising queens in 2 ecologies for 6 years. So we've got 2 queen seasons per year. So it's like a fast forward level of experience. We've got like 12 seasons worth of experience crammed into 6 years. It's been amazing because we've really been able to learn a lot about what bees can do in each ecology. We've really been able to see the performance of our mite-resistant bees in each of those places and observe different behaviors and traits that we see are beneficial to our stock in each place. As I said, we raise queens. Mostly the stock that we're working with is carniolan and pole line. We have procured stock from lots of different places. Initially when I first started out, I started with 50 hives, and I was working primarily with Russian Bee Breeders Association stock. And then I shifted over. I was working a little bit with Sam Comfort's stock. And then I started working with the mixes. So I work a lot with their carniolan and pole line stock. And just last year, Megan Mahoney and Bee inseminated some of our carniolan overwintered daughters from our overwintered carniolan stock with some of her black bee carniolan stock. So we have those inseminated queens here, and we're looking forward to grafting with those this year, seeing what that stock produces. We follow a queen bee calendar, so we make cell raisers or cell builders. We graft. We wait for those queens to mature to 10 days when the cells are capped and the queens are ready to hatch, and then we put them into mating nooks. And they go out and mate and come back and are ready to lay eggs. Oops. In our operation, cell builders are robust colonies that we make queenless so they can receive grafted larvae. Inside, you'll need capped and emerging brood, 2 frames of pollen, and plenty of nectar. I'm going to talk in great detail about this in a moment, but I really just want to give you an overview of like who the heck I am and what I do and why I do it that way first, and then we will go into a deep dive of what's in the cell raiser. Okay. Here we conduct harbo assays on our overwintered stock before they are treated to select for the best queens to graft from. So we do that in Massachusetts. And then we, based on how they perform on those assays, we breed from the best queens in our operation, and they are in a cell raiser and grafting yard. And then all of our mating nooks are in separate yards within about 3 to 5 miles of each other in Western Massachusetts. We have a similar setup in Florida, but we mostly just graft from the stock we pull down from Massachusetts that's been overwintered and then open mate those. So a little bit more variable here because there are just so many of these in Florida. But you don't have to do it that way. If you're a small scale beekeeper, you can get started by choosing your most robust hives that have overwintered successfully and build up well in the spring, and you can select from those. So, I talk about how I do it. And I teach about how I do it, and simultaneously, it's not how I got started. It's how I've evolved over time, over many years of keeping bees and scaling from 50 hives to 300 hives. So I'm not saying you have to do it my way. I'm really encouraging of finding all the different scales for entry for doing this work, and thinking about what's going to be most practical for you to get hands-on experience and get bees that are going to survive in the bioregion where you live. Whoop. So I want to define a couple of things. Graftable larva is 24 hours old, ideally, and is just beginning to curve, but has not completed a C shape. So they are thin, translucent, and they are swimming usually in royal jelly. If you look at the picture on the screen here, what you'll notice is several rows of larvae. If you go down to the very bottom, what you'll notice are some eggs. Those eggs right above them is what I would consider graftable larvae. Anything above that is going to be older and not viable for grafting, in my opinion. Bee and I taught a grafting workshop just last week at the Palm Beach County Expo, and something we were talking about was being larva snobs. So really being discerning about what you're grafting from, and I'll talk a little bit about why later. This is graftable larva that we would select from. So some folks need to use magnifiers to see that graftable larva. Some folks can do it just with their eyes. I wear glasses that have a little magnifier and a convergence support in them. Whatever you need to be able to see what you're grafting is what I recommend you use. And then those sweet little babes go into these cell raisers, which we'll talk about in more detail. This is a grafting frame. There are bars on the frame, and if you look closely here, you can see that there are little cups called queen cups, and that is what your graftable larva goes into and gets dropped into your cell raiser. If you're really good at this, you can do it in super slow motion. Just kidding. We check those grafts at 48 hours to make sure that they are well fed and swimming in royal jelly, and if not, that's an indication there could be something wrong with your cell raiser. There could be something wrong with the larva that you grafted, and it gives you an opportunity to potentially regraft and recover your cell raiser and your graft. So checking at 48 hours is an important part of what we do. And these are those same cells coming out at 10 days to go into mating nooks. Mating nooks are small hives that receive a ripe 10-day cell, or in some cases a 2-day cell. And they're made up of 3 to 8 frames of bees in our operation. So the box on your left is a hive that we would split in half and then shake a couple frames of bees into and drop a cell into, and that is going to raise a queen. Here's one of those queens emerging from her cell. And then 3 weeks later, we're going to go into those hives. We are going to find those well-mated queens, hopefully, if everything has gone well. And then in our operation, we catch those queens for sale, and we do the whole thing all over again. In your operation, you might want to let those queens grow up and overwinter them. You might want to use them to make nooks. You might want to trade them with your friends, like baseball cards. So that's just an overview of like what we do at They Keep Bees as queen producers. When we started doing this, some of the early conversations that we were having with friends and mentors is, how do we make this easier? What are the accessibility points for folks who are just getting started? Really, we want to see everybody raising their own queens. and being able to select from those queens. But that takes a lot of knowledge, as many of you know, in the beekeeping world, and can take a lot of time. So we're thinking of all these hacks for small scale beekeepers to get started at least practicing queen production. We genuinely believe that being able to practice these things makes you a better beekeeper because you learn about the queen and bee biology within the hive. So because of that, we really want to be able to give this superpower to beekeepers to hopefully make their apiaries more sustainable. You know, where we are in the Northeast, it's difficult to keep bees over winter. Winters are long, nectar seasons are short, climate is changing fast. We're losing certain tree forages that we've historically relied on. So there's a lot of challenges that we face up there as beekeepers. And if folks can raise bees from their surviving stock, and they can do that efficiently, then the cost of beekeeping becomes lower, and their capacity to continue to keep bees to support local agriculture increases. So that's one of the reasons we're very committed to doing field research on our farm and figuring some of these things out. These 3 documents are available on my website. I'll drop the link in at the end of this talk for where you can find them. But the first one is a guide to raising queens. The second one is some field data about queen rearing methods and strategies. And the third one is a guide to making very small but successful walkaway splits. This is another document that we produced. We did a big study comparing 10-day cells, 2-day cells, and walkaway splits. I think it's going to be published soon in the Journal for Apiculture with Lynn Adler from UMass. And this is a selection of sort of the methods that were published from our field work. We evaluated 314 queens in the field and sent a subset of 51 queens to the Tarpey lab for morphological analysis and insemination analysis, which means the size of the queens. I'll talk about that in a moment and why it's important. And also how well inseminated those queens were, how many drones they mated with, and how viable the sperm in their spermatheca was. And we did that because we wanted to see, could we make any shortcuts like walkaway splits or 2-day cells accessible for small scale beekeepers, so you didn't have to do massive cell raisers, and you didn't have to wait 10 days for your queens to come out of those cell building structures, but you could try things with a little bit more malleability and a little bit more room for failure. Let's get this slide. It's another shot from the methods for this. So really the goal here is just to compare different ways to raise high quality queens and empower beekeepers to do the same. And really what I want to talk about with this is the results, which were that when we compared queen survival, meaning did the queen hatch from her cell, go out and mate and come back and begin laying eggs, we found that there was no statistical difference between queens raised using a 10-day method, a 2-day method, and a walkaway split. When we looked at the size of the Nook population, the mating Nook population, when that queen returned, we found no significant difference, slightly lower population size on the walkaways because they have a longer brood break period and take a little bit longer to recover, which tells us in the Northeast that we may need to feed those mid-season. Or we may need to tend to them to support them with additional brood to get them through the winter. And then when we looked at the queen size and the mating characteristics, again, we saw no statistical difference between queens raised in 10-day, 2-day, and walkaway split methods, which showed us that we could use all 3 of these methods to raise queens successfully and to teach other beekeepers how to do the same. Which led us to something called Queen School, that started in 2022 and ran through 2023, so a 2-year program, where we were able to teach beekeepers about different queen rearing methods. And over the course of 3 weekends throughout the season, people came and learned how to build cell raisers, how to graft, how to catch queens, how to mark queens, how to do an alcohol wash, and how to select from the best queens in their cell raiser apiary. So all of this staged by us in our home apiary so that people could really learn the different methods and get a lot of practice in a queen production system and take that home and figure out how they wanted to apply it to their own practice. So we will be jumpstarting a program like this again in 2025, but we are taking 2024 off to continue our insemination learning, as well as do some traveling and seeing some mentors and friends. All right, so all of that background to talk to you a little bit about cell builders. And really what I want to say first before I launch into the like, how do I do it? What do I recommend? What are my non-negotiables? Is that there are a lot of ways to build cell builders. And I don't have, I am not a person who is going to tell you that you have to do it this way. What I am going to tell you is this is the way that I do it. And I'm sure as you go through listening to many speakers throughout the day, you'll hear different ways and strategies and recipes for cell builders. Take what works for you, leave the rest. It's really about finding what works for your apiary, what works for your management schedule, what's going to be most efficient for your bees and your IPM plan, etc. Right? It's not about following one guru of beekeeping because there just isn't one. Oh, this is B teaching about queen right cell raisers, which I am determined to get right this year, but haven't had a ton of success with thus far. Okay, and the type of cell raiser I'm going to talk to you about today is called a swarm box. And I'll talk about the critical components of a cell builder as we practice them. Again, do what works for you. Okay, so I don't know why this is here. Oops. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is select the queen that you want to graft from. You want to identify that queen, whatever your selection protocol is, your expectations for selection. You're going to follow those. As I said, for us, that means queens who've overwintered in the Northeast at least 1 year and that do not have any reproductive mites in their brood after that overwintering and after a few weeks of spring buildup. For you, it might be different, and that's okay. Really what it comes down to are what are your priorities and your goals as a beekeeper, and how are these queens that you're selecting from going to help you get there? The next thing that I'd say is I find it pretty vital to mark the queens that you're grafting from. And why does that matter? Why is that important? Because it's going to give you the capacity to track them, A, throughout the season, and B, throughout multiple seasons. You're going to understand how old are those queens, how long have they been in there, where are they coming from. We sometimes do double marks to indicate different lines. So we'll do the year's color, in this case blue, and then we'll do an additional color like pink or bright green to indicate that she's coming from a carniolan line or she's overwintered from an older pole line queen from the mixes lines. So we really like to be able to track different variables, and we do that on our queens, and then we do that on our boxes with push pins or colors on the front of the box so that we can keep track of it on the box as well, in case you go in there and the queen's been superseded or the hive has swarmed. You can understand what's going on, what's historically happened, and restart that process with the daughter potentially, if that is what you want to do. But that's why I think it's important to mark them. Also, when you're making cell builders and you need to pull resource, it is much more efficient to have queens who are marked than to hunt down in these very large, often double deep Langstroth hives. An unmarked queen, especially if she's an all black like this one, because it's going to be hard to find her and take longer. And for us, we are often grafting and preparing our cell builder in the same day and with a few hours in between. And we like to have those few hours in between so that we can eat lunch and drink water and take care of our bodies. And so if we spend that whole time looking for a queen, it really eliminates our capacity to take care of ourselves. Next thing that I want to talk about is mite pressure in cell builders. If you have a hive that is very large, but is rolling a really high mite count with an alcohol wash, you're going to want to treat that hive before you turn it into a cell builder. And the reason is that you are going to attempt to raise a lot of queens in that hive. And what you don't want to do is have mites in your queen cells or have mite pressure on the adult bees or in the brood that is supposed to be tending to and taking care of your queens, because that's going to lead to lower nutritional value in the queens that you're raising. It's potentially going to lead to queens with a higher propensity for disease. And so to eliminate both of those things, I recommend that you're checking the mite levels in those cell builder colonies and treating as appropriate for you and for your operation. If you put together a cell builder with a lot of capped brood, but all of that capped brood comes from a hive that has a really high mite load, as all of that brood emerges, you're going to have all of those mites on those adult bees who are responsible for taking care of your queens. So again, not going to be great for the viability of your queens over the long term. Okay, next thing I want to talk to you about is this tiny phallus. Why does this matter when you're building cell builders? It matters because you want to have reproductive drones to mate with your queens. So if you're smaller scale, if you're just getting started, if you're aspiring to build cell builders or build better cell builders, my recommendation would be to start building those cell builders to graft queens into when you see reproductive mites in your, reproductive drones in your apiary. You can assess a reproductive drone by picking one up with your hands, giving him a little squeeze, and if they are ready to mate, this phallus will just pop right out of them. Yes, that does kill the one drone that you have squeezed, but it also gives you a lot of information about whether you're ready to get started with queen rearing where you are. This isn't infallible if there isn't weather that is conducive to mating queens. Like if it's too cold for drones to fly or too windy, you could end up with low mating percentage. But it is a good indicator, especially if you are just getting started with cell building and experimenting with queen production. Next, you want to choose a robust and healthy hive to make your cell builder. So this is that photo I showed you before. This was a double deep Langstroth hive that we shook down to a single box. And we took all the bees from that top box and put them in the bottom box. You can see a lot of actually flying drones in this slow motion video. And then in this, we put all of the components of the cell builder that I'll talk about next. But really, we're wanting to make this big, robust hive with lots of bees in it. And to do that, we have to start with a big, robust hive and then evaluate the different components that we need in there to be successful. So you don't want to be trying to make a cell builder from a weak hive, from a hive that's just getting started with its brood production. That's not going to lead to optimal success. So you really do want to be discerning with what you are selecting from. And again, check the mite load, make sure that it's low. Next, you're going to need to find and remove your queen. And you're going to need to be discerning frame by frame in that cell builder, making sure you got your queen out, making sure you don't see any queen cells in that hive. So if they were just on the cusp of swarming, you want to check every frame, either brushing or shaking them off to make sure there are no unkept queen cells, capped queen cells, emerging queen cells, rogue queens that flew in from somewhere else, which happens a lot in Florida, especially during swarm season, because those queens are going to basically fly into your hive or stay in your hive and disrupt your graftable larvae from being raised into queen cells, right? They're going to be giving off the queen pheromone that is going to discourage your bees from raising new queens because they already have one, or they are going to go through and systemically tear down each of your cells once they have matured, and you're going to come back a few days later and feel very frustrated. So making sure you've got that queen out. Again, here's where marking her really comes into play as an important exercise. Okay, and then next you are going to whether you're going to use the cell raiser larva or larva from a different queen that you've selected to graft from, you are going to make sure that you have that larva handy. For us, we'll often have the queens we're going to graft from, the queens that we consider our breeder queens, and our cell raisers in the same yard so that we're able to pull very easily from those hives and place those into the cell raiser. We like to do this little trick that I think I learned from Kirk Webster, where we take a frame of brood with 24-hour larva in it, and we drop it into an already prepared cell raiser, and we leave it there for a few hours before we graft. And we come back, we brush that frame off, and we graft from that larva, which is now really well fed because there's no other open brood in our cell raisers, and leads to a really nice take. So just a little tip or trick, but regardless of whether you do that or not, you really want to be grafting from that 24-hour larva. You want to make sure that that larva is well fed. So I shouldn't be looking into these cells and seeing dry dry larva, because it's A, going to make your grafts harder, and B, indicates that the nutritional value for those queens might be a little bit lower. If you are going out and doing an assessment to figure out which queens you're going to graft from, and you're seeing dry larva, then maybe you need to feed, maybe you need to do some supplemental feeding before you're going to be ready to get started. Or maybe you just need to be more discerning about which queens you're going to select from. Okay, why does that matter? I went to a talk last week by Garrett Slater from the Baton Rouge lab, and he was talking a lot about where we have impacts as people who are producing queens, as beekeepers, and really the larval stage and the diet of your larva. That's going to have the most impact on your end goal of producing a large queen with good morphological features and a well-developed spermatheca that can hold a lot of drone semen. She's going to have well-developed ovaries. She's going to be able to lay eggs for a long time. So where you have the most impact is right here, selecting those small larvae, making sure they're well fed, and then making sure that you build a cell raiser that is going to continue the nutritional buildup of that queen as she matures through her larval stage. After that, she doesn't pupate anymore and become a bigger queen by magic, right? So really you have the impact in her development when she is a larva and not after that. So feed the queens you're going to graft from well, make sure your cell raisers have robust nutrition, make sure you're being discerning about that larva, and those things are going to lead to you being able to raise high quality queens. So to that end, having both nectar and pollen in your cell builders is absolutely important. This is just a great frame of dry pollen as well as nectar being built out that illustrates my point, but I'll talk about how much nectar and pollen we want in our cell builders in a moment. I always add more pollen than I think I need. So if I'm grafting one grafting frame, which is anywhere from 36 to 52 queen cups, I'm going to add 2 frames of pollen. And then I'm going to add more nectar than I think I need. Why am I going to do that? Because I want to make sure that A, my queens are well fed, and B, the adult bees who are going to be pulling the wax and feeding the queens in my cell builder are well fed as well. So I'm thinking about nutrition as a tool for everybody in that cell builder. So everyone, the queens as well as the bees, have what they need to thrive. All right, and here I wanted to talk about the difference between bee bread and dry pollen and why each is important according to what I know. So bee bread feeds bees who have just emerged from their pupation and are getting ready to get to work as young cleaning and nurse bees. Dry pollen is used to make a combination of food for the queens to feed them royal jelly. And so both of those things are important for your cell builder. The bee bread is important for your adult bees, and the dry pollen is important for your queens. So when I'm saying 2 frames of pollen, I mean 2 frames of dry pollen that I'm making sure are in that hive. And then in addition to that, bee bread throughout on the food frames that I'm going to add to the hive for the nutrition of the adult bees in that hive. Next thing I'm going to do is add capped brood. In the swarm box model, I am only adding capped brood. Why? Because if I add open larva, even if it is fifth in stage, if it is like just about to be capped, I am giving the bees a choice between the larva that I grafted and the larva that's in the hive. And sometimes they're going to try to raise a queen cell from that insufficient older larva, and they're going to ignore either some or all of your grafted larva, and you are not going to have a successful graft, or you're going to have to put all this work in and get many less queens. And so for me, when I'm building swarm box cell builders, it is crucial to have that capped and emerging brood, because that is going to be the bees that keep the cell builder running. And it is crucial to make sure I am discerning that there is no open brood on my frames, because that is going to disrupt the bees taking care of the larvae I've grafted into that cell builder. You also need a lot of nurse bees and foraging bees. So it's a both and here for me. A lot of people will tell you you need nurse bees for cell builder, you just need nurse bees to take care of the queens. Yeah, but you also need forager bees to come in to continue the nutritional input in that hive, so that they're not just relying on whatever you've put in there, but they're able to collect from the ongoing, hopefully, nectar flow that is happening where you are. So I think both and are important. Where do you get all the nurse bees? If you are a smaller scale beekeeper and you don't have a bunch of double overwintered double Langstroth hives to select from, to shake nurse bees from, etc., there's a few different ways that we've done it that I will recommend to you now. You could use swarms, or you could use false swarms. This is a small swarm that we grab the queen from and then use the bees to boost a cell builder. You can also shake or brush bees from open brood from other hives. Again, if you're doing either of these, you want to make sure that you've got the queen from that hive and you're not shaking or brushing a queen into your cell builder, because she will destroy all of the work that you do once you graft. Another thing that we like to do, let's see if this video will play, is we'll do smoke ups. So this is a comfort hive that we smoked up. Bee is going to grab the queen, and then we can take all of the nurse bees that are in this top box, shake them into a package funnel, down into a package, and that gives us a nice boost for our cell builders. So you can get them that way. I don't recommend you get them from the outside of the hive, like this chaotic mess here, because those bees are going to be forage bees that are just going to drift back to that location. So unless you're able to collect from the outside of a hive, take it to another place, and even then you're just going to be getting forager bees. For me, for our forager bees, I like to use the original location, wherever that cell builder was when I was getting started to build it up. I am going to use that spot so that the foraging bees from that hive are already yoked to that spot, going to return to that spot and continue to forage for the hive, and thus the cell builder, and keep your bees flush with pollen and nectar throughout the duration of the queens being reared there. So that's my preference. Not everybody does it that way. Like I said, there are a lot of different ways to do it, but when I'm making both splits and cell builders, I prefer to use that original location, because I'm able to capitalize on the foraging force that already exists in that location and is already doing the work of bringing pollen and nectar there, and doesn't need to orient to that space or find those resources. It's already happening. Last thing I want to talk about is why fresh wax matters. So when you are rearing queens, you want to have wax building or builder bees available in your hive. Those are 5 to 12-day-old bees. There are a lot of different ways to do this. You could put capped brood over a queen excluder and allow that to begin to emerge. And then those are nurse bees who you know in 5 days will be builder bees. Or you can just keep an eye out for fresh wax in the hives you're going to use to build cell builders, because you want those bees who are drawing wax to draw the wax down for your queen cells to be able to make them nice and big and fat and allow your queen larva to mature inside of that fresh wax. And finally, after you have grafted into your cell raiser, you are going to want to go back and check your work. As I said earlier, you check your work at 48 hours. And what you should see is in each of these queen cups, you should see lots of royal jelly. And then you should see just the beginnings of the cells being raised. So here on the top row, you can see that the bees have drawn wax out just a tiny bit, maybe like 1/4 of an inch. And that's an indicator that they are feeding and tending to that larva and that they are going to continue drawing that cell down. That's not infallible. Sometimes they will cannibalize these for a variety of reasons, both lack of nutrition, changes of temperature in the external environment, as well as potentially having a rogue queen fly into the cell raiser. But this is a good way to track after you've done your work, waiting 48 hours to go back and see, okay, how many of my grafts have taken? So how many potential cells could I have, so that you can start planning forward for where you're going to get the bees and other materials that you need to make up your mating nooks. So I said I would talk about the art of cell building, and I didn't want to leave you without a recipe. So in our cell builders, we like to use double Langstroth hives that we work down into a single 10-frame Langstroth box. So this is a cell builder, lots of bees on the outside of this hive. On either end of this box are going to be 2 to 3 frames of nectar. And then we're going to put in 4 frames of capped and emerging brood. And then next to that, we're going to put 2 frames of pollen. And then in the middle, we are going to put 1 grafting frame. We do 2 now, and this is slightly altered to meet that need. But when you're first starting out, or if you are trying to really dial in, I recommend you stick with 1 grafting frame. If you need to, that leaves you space for a feeder. Sometimes in the midsummer, we have to feed these cell builders in addition to having them forage and bring back food. That's just because we'll have sort of disruptions in the nectar flow or changes in the nectar flow that will lead to a delay in nectar being brought in and stored in the hive. And so we like to leave that room for a feeder in case we need it. Sometimes we'll just put the frame feeder right in there and let it run through the whole season so that we have that in case of emergencies. That's really going to depend on how many cells you're trying to raise throughout the year, whether you're trying to keep your cell builders going throughout the season, and what the nectar availability where you are is when you're trying to make cell builders. But generally for us, this is a recipe for building swarm box cell builders. Now for us, what we do now is that we then recombine this swarm box with a queen right box on top at the 5th day. So once our queen cells are capped, and we found over time that this leads to longer, larger cells. So we do prefer to do it that way, but for a long, long time, we just did 10 days of swarm box cell raising and allowed our bees to raise queens in these swarm boxes without recombining with a queen right hive. So as I said before, lots of ways to do it, and you're going to change the way that you do it over time based on your own preferences. And that's great, because you should dial in what works for you and what systems are most efficient for where you are and what your goals are as a beekeeper. I think that's it for me. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to drop into the comments and questions and see what your inquiries might be.
Thanks, Ange. That was fantastic. Appreciate your presentation. They're always very thoughtful, and glad that you're sharing your wisdom with us, especially the recipe. Recipes are good for cooking.
Mm-hmm.
So do you want to tackle some of the questions independently? We got a few minutes, or I can tee them up for you.
Yeah, I'll tackle them.
Okay, sounds good. Spectacular.
All right, I'm gonna start with Amy's question at the bottom. Amy said she's interested in learning about pollen for queen food production and bee bread for larval food production. In a time of limited resources, are the bees able to make do using the wrong raw material for queens and for larvae? That's a great question. My understanding, and this is again just my understanding, which is not infallible, is that bee bread is fed to bees after the 48-hour mark. And so it is not actually food for queens. I'm not sure if they would make do, but my understanding is that the bee bread is actually a part of what alters the bees' capacity for reproduction. And so I don't imagine that that would make for the most ideal queens. And again, I don't think that in times of limited resources, you should be raising queens unless you have to, in which case you might be supplementing with pollen patties and feed. But unless you are on a production schedule needing to meet certain orders, there's no reason for you to do that as a small scale beekeeper. And so really you're wanting to wait for those most productive times where we're seeing a lot of pollen coming in, a lot of nectar coming in, and those beautiful phalluses from our reproductive drones, so that you know that it's going to be a viable season for raising and mating queens. Okay, Malcolm wants to know, with grafting in Florida, would it be useful to put a queen excluder between the entrance and the lowest box so other queens can't get in? You know, Malcolm, you would think that would be useful, and I'm going to tell you the truth is that we do it, but it doesn't always work. Sometimes the feral queens, the queens that are like coming out of the woods somewhere and usurping or trying to usurp your cell builders, those queens are going to be small. They're going to be able to slip between the queen excluder bars, and they're going to be able to get into your cell raiser anyway. So it's not infallible. We do that in all of our cell builders as an insurance policy because I'm a little bit neurotic. But it's not an ironclad solution. So you really do have to be mindful of those boxes. And actually, one of the reasons that we started recombining our queenless cell builders is because of that queen pheromone that's going to be in that hive, which is going to lead to a lower chance of usurpation. So rather than being queenless for 10 days, which is a 10-day window in which those queens could potentially be usurped, or those cells could potentially be usurped, we like to just limit that to 5 days, recombine with a queen excluder between the boxes, and lower the chance of that cell raiser being usurped by a rogue queen. So that's sort of our solution, in addition to the queen excluders at the bottom. And sometimes we even put queen excluders at the top so they can't come in through a rotten box edge or something. But nature's gonna nature, so it's not infallible at all. Yeah, anonymous attendee, on the spot queen rearing approaches are great. Like I didn't mention it in the talk, but it's in one of the slides. I really like I did the Miller method for a long time when I was first getting started to get queens. I also did cloak boards, which are similar to, I think it's Sue Kobe does the double screen board, Queen Right cell builders. I know Megan Mahoney does those as well. And then I know Melanie Kirby, who's speaking later, she does like a honey pillow between her Queen Right hive and then the cell builder box on top. That's an approach that I'm going to be trying this summer because I just want to like dial in Queen Right cell builders, because you can graft into them more frequently and more consistently, and you don't have to rebuild them. The one drawback of these queenless boxes is that you really have to be boosting them constantly with brood so that they don't go laying worker on you, right? Because if there's no brood pheromone for a long period of time, they're going to start becoming a laying worker, and that's a real bummer. But if you're just trying to do a couple rounds of cells, you can definitely use these, and they're effective and they're easier to make than some of the other methods. But for us, we're trying to lock in and dial in both Queen Right and queenless. So we've got a variety of options for different demands throughout the season. But yeah, on the spot queen rearing is great. It's a great way to get started, to manage a backyard operation. And again, to understand what is the biology and the maturity cycle of the brood in my hive, and what is the biology and the maturity cycle of the queens in my hive. That's going to just make you inherently a better beekeeper. Troy, I will link to that study once I've answered a few more questions and as we roll into the next speaker so that folks have it. Whoops. Okay, Brad, do I have any issue with wax buildup on my cells? Oh, I think you mean like bridge comb. Maybe that's what you mean. I sometimes do when there's a really big nectar flow, like the black locust flow up north, that like it kicks in and it just cranks for like a few days and then it ends very abruptly. I see a wild buildup of wax between cells. I don't leave room for wax building because I want them to focus their wax building on the queen cells generally. But I do find that they'll make frames fatter to store more nectar, etc. And I do find some bridge combing, it's pretty easy to just cut those out or cut them down and still use and have viable cells. So I don't worry about it that much. But I do find it when there's just like a big wax production that comes on and is only going to be happening for a short period of time. Okay, and then we've got Claire who wants me to describe the smoke up method of getting nurse bees. Okay, so that was a double comfort hive that we had there, so 2 boxes deep. And what we were going to do is we crack open the bottom of the hive, so we put a stick or a hive tool or something in the bottom, so we've got a nice wedge that light can get into. And then from where that is, we smoke the hive. Not like you don't want to gas them with smoke, but we smoke them enough to get the queen running. All the bees run up into an empty box at the top. We are able to then grab the queen on site, and then all the bees run to the edges of that box. You can shake that box into a package funnel that goes down into a package box. You could shake them into a nook box and take them over to wherever you need them for your cell builders. Generally, what's going to happen with those smoke ups or drum ups is that when the bees are running, the flying bees are going to fly, and the nurse bees are just going to run and then cling on to whatever space is empty. And so that it makes it easy to A, make sure we got the queen, and B, get actual nurse age bees who are not flying bees yet, and make sure that we have enough of those to then put into our cell raisers. All right, Derek, queen right hive below or above the cell builder? I don't think it matters, honestly. I've done both. It's a pain in the butt to have to move, especially during a nectar flow, the heavy queen right hives off of the box to get your cell builders below. And if you're not a careful, like mindful beekeeper and you tend to be a little bit more slam happy, then maybe you do want to put your cells on the top so that you don't jostle anything at any stage during removal. But for me, usually I keep the cells on the bottom, put the queen right on the top, and then I just take her off and get the cells from underneath, because I don't want to do the box flipping. But honestly, I think you could do either and you'd be fine. And when do I put them together? I recombine a queenless swarm box with a queen right hive at 5 days after grafting. So I wait until those queen cells are capped and then I recombine those. So that's just how I'm doing it. Okay, let's see what else. Oh, someone wants to know when Queen School starts. We are not having a Queen School in 2024. We will have a Queen School in 2025. So we don't have the dates for that yet, but if you would like to follow me on Instagram or join our newsletter, we have a website that I'll put in the chat at the end. Links, as I said, I'll add those at the end. Oh, and Bruce wants to know how I put 2 colors on a queen very carefully. We're still doing it on the thorax. We'll do double dots, right? So we'll do say a blue dot for the year that she was born, and then wanting to update that for this year, we will have a green dot maybe. And so we'll just have the blue dot, let that completely dry. So put her in a queen cage or in a queen clip until that is dry, and then add the green dot over it so that it sort of looks like a Venn diagram a little bit, blue and green. And you're able to then track different traits or different families or different years in that way. It's helpful. It takes a lot of practice. Practice marking your queens by marking your drones, and that will make you more confident marking your queens.